autoridades presentes, senhoras e senhores, boa noite. Recebemos, com uma grande honra que os recebemos nessa noite na Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie, na realização do primeiro evento do Núcleo de Pesquisa Mackenzie em Ciência, Fé e Sociedade, Discovery Mackenzie. O Discovery Mackenzie é um núcleo de pesquisa interdisciplinar que promove estudos científicos focados em complexidade e informação na busca de evidências que compõem para a ação de processos naturais ou design inteligente na natureza, explorando as implicações dessas descobertas para a relação entre ciência e sociedade, incluindo a fé. No ensejo desse evento, teremos as conferências com Michael Behe e Douglas Axe, dois grandes nomes do design inteligente. Gostaríamos de registrar e agradecer a presença do reverendo Roberto Brasileiro Silva, presidente do Supremo Concílio da Igreja Presbiteriana do Brasil, reverendo Dr. Augustus Nicodemos Gomes Lopes, vice-presidente do Supremo Concílio da Igreja Presbiteriana do Brasil, Dr. José Inácio Ramos, presidente da diretoria executiva do Instituto Presbiteriano Mackenzie, reverendo Dr. Davi Charles Gomes, chanceler da Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie, professor Dr. Benedito Guimarães Aguiar Neto, reitor da Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie, o presidente do Discovery dos Estados Unidos, Sr. Stephen Burry, e o professor Enésio de Almeida Filho, presidente emérito da TDI Brasil, Sociedade Brasileira do Design Inteligente. Gostaríamos também de agradecer a presença do professor Dr. Marcos Eberlin, presidente executivo da TDI Brasil. Somos uma instituição de ensino confessional, com a missão de contribuir na formação de indivíduos e, consequentemente, na sociedade. Sendo assim, temos como prática iniciar nossos eventos com uma reflexão, para a qual convidamos o reverendo Roberto Brasileiro Silva.
Meus amados, o texto que nós escolhemos para nós pensarmos um pouco nesta hora é Isaías 45, a partir do verso 8. Destilai os céus dessas alturas, e as nuvens chuvam justiça. Abra-se a terra e produza salvação, e juntamente com ela brote a justiça, eu, o Senhor, as criei. Ai daquele que contende com o seu Criador, e não passa de um caco de barro entre outros cacos. Acaso dirá o barro ao que lhe dá forma, que fazes? Ou a tua obra não tem alça? Ai daquele que diz ao pai, por que geras? E à mulher, por que dás à luz? Assim diz o Senhor, o Santo de Israel, aquele que o formou, quereis acaso saber as coisas futuras? Quereis dar ordem acerca de meus filhos e acerca das obras de minhas mãos? Eu fiz a terra e criei nela o homem. As minhas mãos entenderam os céus, e a todos os seus exércitos dei as minhas ordens. Eu, na minha justiça, suscitei a Ciro, e todos os seus caminhos endireitarei. Ele edificará a minha cidade, libertará os meus exilados, não por preço, nem por presentes, diz o Senhor dos Exércitos. Assim diz o Senhor, a riqueza do Egito, as mercadorias da Etiópia e os sabeus, homens de grande estatura, passarão a ter poder, e serão teus. Servir-te-ão, irão em grilhões, diante de ti se prostrarão, e te farão as tuas súplicas, dizendo, só contigo estás Deus, e não há outro que seja Deus. Verdadeiramente tu és Deus misterioso, ó Deus de Israel, ó Salvador. Envergonhar-se-ão, e serão confundidos todos eles, cairão a uma sem ignomínia os que fabricam ídolos. Israel, porém, será salvo pelo Senhor, com salvação eterna. Não serei envergonhados, nem confundidos em toda a eternidade. Porque assim diz o Senhor, que criou os céus, o Deus que formou a terra, que a fez e a estabeleceu. Não a criou para ser um caos, mas para ser habitada. Eu sou o Senhor, não há outro. Vamos orar. Ó Pai, nós te louvamos, de acordo com a tua graça e o teu poder. Ministra para nós nesta hora que nós estamos olhando esse núcleo de ciência, fé e sociedade. Nós te louvamos, ó Pai, por esse momento tão especial na vida do Mackenzie, Discovery Mackenzie. Te louvamos, ó Pai, pelo momento especial que o Senhor permitiu a nós vermos acontecer, de acordo com a tua vontade soberana. Nos ensina, ó Pai, a entendermos o teu propósito Da eternidade à eternidade, Tu és Deus. Tu és o nosso Salvador. Tu és o nosso Criador. E em Cristo Jesus nós Te louvamos, Te bendizemos e suplicamos a Tua bênção, hoje e sempre. Amém. Meus amados, quando nós olhamos para o texto de Isaías 45, nós temos a visão de um Deus que é criador de todas as coisas. Um Deus que forma, um Deus que cria, um Deus que estabelece, um Deus de justiça. Eu creio que a grande mensagem para nós nesta hora está no verso 18. Porque assim diz o Senhor que criou os céus, o Deus que formou a terra, que a fez e a estabeleceu, que não a criou para ser um caos, mas para ser habitada. Eu sou o Senhor e não há outro. Eu creio que quando nós olhamos nessa perspectiva a pessoa de Deus, nós podemos ficar mais tranquilos. Não é só um Deus criador sobre todas as coisas, mas é o Deus que organizou todas as coisas. É o Deus que fez com que tudo pudesse, de fato, estar de acordo com o seu projeto, de acordo com a sua graça. Quando nós estamos aqui pensando em fé, em ciência, e pensando na sociedade, nós podemos então começar a analisar nossas próprias vidas e ver a responsabilidade que temos sobre nós. Nada que existe é obra do acaso. Há um Deus soberano, há um Deus inteligente, que criou todas as coisas e fez tudo de acordo com o seu plano eterno. Nada que existe é simplesmente uma obra dos homens, um descobrir simplesmente dos homens por esta ou por aquela razão. Tudo Deus estabeleceu num plano de justiça eterna dele, desde a eternidade. Como é bom nós olharmos Deus nessa perspectiva. Como é bom nós entendermos a eternidade de Deus, entendermos que este Deus é o nosso Salvador, é o Senhor das nossas vidas, que Jesus Cristo se faz presente em nós, habita em nós, e pelo Espírito Santo toca os nossos corações para compreendermos todas as coisas. Como é bom entendermos que nesse texto, que exalta a criação de Deus, que exalta Deus organizando todas as coisas, que exalta o poder de Deus, nós vemos Deus usando o sino. Pode ser difícil pensarmos nisso. Deus usando o rei daqueles dias. Deus eterno é assim que Ele faz. Até as estruturas que nós muitas vezes consideramos simplesmente humanas, está debaixo do governo dEle. E Ele as usa de acordo com a vontade soberana dEle. Por isso, nós estamos conectados com a sociedade. Nós não estamos ausentes do mundo que nós vivemos. Nós não fazemos ciência por fazer ciência. E nós não temos fé por ter fé. Nós temos um mundo onde nós temos a obrigação de dar o nosso testemunho e nós temos a obrigação de dizer a este mundo que todas as nossas descobertas é um Deus inteligente que criou todas as coisas e orienta todas as coisas e fez de nós o seu povo, para a glória dEle, para o louvor dEle, para a honra dEle. Nós somos parte deste povo eleito de Deus. Um Deus que chamou Ciro, usou a estrutura de um mundo paganizado para mostrar a sua glória e o seu poder, e fez Ciro objeto da sua vontade. Deus há de usar muitas coisas no Mackenzie. Pode ser que você nem entenda o que está acontecendo hoje. Pode ser que você esteja pensando, o que está fazendo o Mackenzie, lançando uma semente? Mas uma semente que pode mudar as estruturas futuras do Mackenzie. Mudar as relações do Mackenzie. Mudar as nossas vidas. E Deus vai usar todas as pessoas, porque é assim que Ele faz, para a glória dEle. Porque assim diz o Senhor que criou os céus, o Deus que formou a terra, que a fez e a estabeleceu, que não a criou para ser um caos, mas para ser habitada. Eu sou o Senhor, e não há outro. Que Deus assim nos abençoe. Amém.
Agora gostaríamos de convidar o Sr. Stephen Barry para a sua saudação.
Thank you so much. It is so great to be here this evening. A special thanks to Provost Benedito, Marcos Eberlin, Davi Gomez, Anezio, and others here at Mackenzie University who have made us feel so welcome. It is wonderful to be in Sao Paulo. Tonight we celebrate an exciting new partnership between two organizations, each with its own proud tradition and history. For nearly 150 years, Mackenzie University has been a shining light in Sao Paulo, throughout Brazil, and beyond your country's borders. Likewise, the Impact of Discovery Institute, headquartered in Seattle, Washington, has had its impact felt increasingly beyond our country's borders. It is a testament to the power of ideas, reason, and perseverance, and especially to the power of faith. Discovery Institute began modestly in 1991. The mission of our organization is to advance a culture of purpose, creativity, and innovation. We believe in a universe that holds purpose, that is designed for inquiry, and that affirms the inherent dignity of human beings. We believe in the power of human creativity bestowed to us by our Creator to expand horizons, enable discovery, and illuminate public policy. And we believe that innovation from the minds of human beings offers a hopeful future of abundance, technological achievement, and economic prosperity. These are values that are undoubtedly shared by our friends here at Mackenzie University. In 1996, Discovery Institute launched what would prove to be its largest and most impactful program, the Center for Science and Culture. The center provides an institutional home to intelligent design researchers and those challenging neo-Darwinism. Tonight you'll hear from two of our scholars, Dr. Michael Behe and Dr. Douglas Axe. Altogether, more than 50 intelligent design researchers call Discovery Institute home. And collectively, they comprise what I believe to be one of the finest science faculties in the world. Now, it would seem that the work of intelligent designers would be easy. After all, design is evident all around us. This auditorium is no doubt the result of numerous architects, builders, and maintenance workers. But as we also know, it pales in comparison to the inner workings and complexity in a single human cell. Yet neo-Darwinists assure us that the appearance of design in the cell is only an illusion, and that complexity, beauty, and meaning are accidents of a purposeless universe. That worldview denies truth and helps explain why the work of intelligent design researchers is not easy. Although design is written on the human heart, militant atheists claim that science is hostile to faith and traditional beliefs. Fortunately, we know this not to be true, and that science is actually on our side. This new partnership represents a crucial step forward in making the scientific case for intelligent design. Discovery Institute provides a much-needed home to researchers and scholars who are dedicated to science, design, and especially to truth. I'm excited to expand our reach through the partnership with Mackenzie University here in Sao Paulo. I look forward to working together with you and witnessing the fruits of our labor in the months and years ahead. Thank you, and may God bless the work of the Discovery Mackenzie Research Group.
Senhoras e senhores, para iniciarmos as conferências desta noite, gostaríamos de convidar o professor Dr. Marcos Eberlin, que fará a moderação dos trabalhos. Receberemos agora os nossos conferencistas, Sr. Michael Behe e professor Dr. Douglas Axe.
É um privilégio muito grande estarmos aqui, inaugurando o Núcleo de Pesquisas Mackenzie em Ciência, Fé e Sociedade. Esse é um evento histórico, único, pioneiro e que, com certeza, levará a mensagem do design inteligente para o Brasil e para o mundo. A gente quer discutir as nossas origens, colocar as duas teorias sobre a mesa e fazer a melhor inferência. E, para dar início às atividades do Núcleo, nada melhor do que esse homem que está aqui do nosso lado. Ele é o grande pioneiro do design inteligente moderno no mundo. Ao lançar o livro A Caixa Preta de Darwin, ele revolucionou os alicerces, né, do darwinismo, colocou o design inteligente na roda dos debates científicos e tornou o design inteligente uma teoria digna de ser debatida na academia, ao introduzir os conceitos da bioquímica na origem e na arquitetura da vida. Então, Michael Behe, nós vamos ter o privilégio de iniciar as atividades do centro ouvindo quem realmente iniciou o movimento do design inteligente moderno. Em seguida, nós vamos ouvir o Douglas X. Talvez seja a estrela emergente do design inteligente no mundo, não é? Ele lançou recentemente o livro Undeniable, inegável, né? Como a bioquímica confirma aquela intuição de que nós fomos planejados. Então, é um privilégio muito grande da gente estar aqui hoje à noite ouvindo esses dois grandes nomes do design inteligente. Nós vamos ouvi-los nas suas palestras e depois de cada uma das palestras a gente vai abrir também para perguntas. A gente vai ter uns 15 minutos para perguntas, então se prepare. Se você acha que não consegue acompanhar em inglês, não esqueça de pegar o seu fone para a tradução simultânea, tá bom? Então, esteja preparado para as palestras em inglês. Então, vamos passar agora a primeira palestra do Michael Behe. Vai falar sobre a complexidade redutível. Michael Behe, it's a great privilege to have you here. And, yeah. And I was just telling people how important your work has been to disseminate the message of intelligent design and to bring joy to this debate. And it's a pleasure, and we are looking forward to hear what you have to say to us tonight about the history of this concept that you introduced of the irreducible complexity. Please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Eberlin. It's wonderful to be here with everyone tonight. This is my second visit to Mackenzie. I was here in 2012, and in both instances, I've received a very gracious treatment, and I am always pleased to be at your university. So please invite me for next year. All right, so as Marcos said, the title of the talk is Celebrating 20 Years of Irreducible Complexity. But the real story began 150 years or so ago when Charles Darwin wrote his great book on the origin of species. And in it, Darwin proposed to explain something that no one else had been able to explain before, and that is how the great variety and complexity of life might have been generated by simple, natural, unguided processes. And in short, his theory said that there are many, many more animals and plants generated than can survive to reproduce, simply because there's not enough food to go around. And there's great variety in different categories of animals. So he deduced that the ones whose chance variation gave them an edge in the struggle to survive would tend to survive and leave more offspring than others. And if those variations could be inherited, then their descendants would come to dominate the population. And if you repeated this many times, then perhaps the organisms could change considerably from what they had been in the beginning. And it was really a very good idea, and many scientists at the time saw the great promise in his idea. But some were also skeptical. They thought that while it could explain some things about biology, it couldn't explain everything about biology. In particular, the more complex systems that were known to the 19th century scientists. And one in particular was the eye. The vertebrate eye was known to be very complex. It's got a retina that detects light, and it's got a lens that focuses light, and it's got an iris and eyelids and many other different features. And if an organism were born so unfortunate as to be missing one of those features, it would have very poor vision or would be blind. And so a number of scientists doubted that Darwin's theory could account for complex systems like that. But Darwin knew about the eye too, and he wrote about it in a section of The Origin of Species titled Organs of Extreme Perfection and Complication. And in it, he wrote that, well, he did not know how his theory could account for the eye. Nonetheless, he said, if you look at eyes in modern animals, there's a great variety. For example, some animals have just a simple light-sensitive spot. It can detect light, but it can't tell which direction the light is coming from. For example, if light came from this direction and struck the light-sensitive spot, or came from this direction and struck the light-sensitive spot, it would stimulate it in both instances. So the organism could tell it was in the presence of light, but couldn't tell which direction the light came from. Nonetheless, added Darwin, there are other organisms that we know of that have the light-sensitive spot in a little indented region. And now light coming from one side will strike the retina on this area and leave the other side in shadow. So at least theoretically, he said, the organism could determine which direction the light was coming from, and that would be an improvement. And if the indented spot started to be filled by a gelatinous material, a transparent gelatinous material, that could be the beginning of a lens, which would improve the function of the eye further. So Darwin said that even something as complex as the eye might be achievable by evolution in very small steps. And the idea then was that if evolution could explain the eye, what could it not explain? But there was a problem. There was a question left unaddressed by Darwin. Where did the light-sensitive spot come from? Seems like an odd starting point for his theory. Most things are not light-sensitive. The floor is not light-sensitive. The podium is not light-sensitive. What does it take to make a light-sensitive spot? Well, here Darwin declined even to try to address the problem. He wrote, "How a nerve comes to be sensitive to light hardly concerns us more than how life itself originated." Well, okay. But they're both big problems. And if you can't explain how a light-sensitive spot originated, then you might have trouble with the other steps as well. The problem was that in his time, neither Darwin nor any fellow scientists knew about molecules. They thought that the cell was simple. It was just a piece of jelly, protoplasm. And it might have worked by some mysterious forces, maybe magnetism or something. But it probably wasn't, it wasn't a big deal. And many scientists of that time thought that cells might just spontaneously pop up into existence. So simple did they think that the cell was. Nonetheless, in the 150 years since Darwin's work, science has learned a lot about the cell, and we now know that it is very, very complicated. And that was the topic of my book 20 years ago, Darwin's Black Box, which thankfully was translated into Portuguese. And I argued in the book that Darwin's theory was insufficient to explain much of what science has discovered about the cell since his book was published. And even from the beginning, this argument seemed to take many people by surprise. And so it got some attention. For example, the New York Times, if you can read it way up there, invited me to write a little essay explaining to readers what exactly intelligent design is and why it points, why irreducible complexity points to intelligent design. I'm told that they got more letters of protest for that essay than any other essay they had previously. And the argument of Darwin's black box and the molecular level of life is actually exploring a problem that Darwin himself recognized in The Origin of Species. In 1859, he wrote that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down, but I can find out no such case. Here Darwin was emphasizing that, in his view, evolution had to be gradual. It had to occur in tiny steps over long periods of time, because he knew if an organism improved rapidly in large leaps, then it would look very suspiciously as if something other than random processes were involved. So he always insisted on the very tiny steps. Well, okay, let's take Darwin at his word, and let's ask what sort of a system can't be built or seems very unlikely to be built by numerous successive slight modifications. And such a system is one which is irreducibly complex. And an irreducibly complex system, that's a fancy phrase, but it actually stands for a simple idea. It just means that there's a system or a machine or something that has a number of different parts, and the parts all have to work together in order for the system to function. And the problem with that for Darwin's theory is if a system has to put together gradually, then an irreducibly complex system would be difficult because it needs all its components to work. And a good example of an irreducibly complex system from our everyday world is a mechanical mousetrap. Now, a mousetrap that you buy in a store has a number of components. It's got this big wooden platform to which everything else is attached. It has this tightly wound spring with an extension here that overlaps this other metal bar called the hammer, which actually squashes the mouse. And the hammer has to be pushed over and stabilized by something called the holding bar, and the end of the holding bar has to be inserted into something called the catch to stabilize it. Now, the trap needs all of those components to work. If you're missing the spring, or you're missing the holding bar, it's not that you catch mice less efficiently than you used to. You can't catch mice at all. So that's what is meant by the term irreducibly complex. Well, it turns out that some things that looked simple to 19th century scientists have turned out to be irreducibly complex. And one good example is this shown here. This is an electron micrograph of some tissue in your lungs. And these big things here are called goblet cells. And goblet cells secrete mucus into your lungs. And these little hair-like things are called cilia. And they look simple, but they have this interesting property that they can wave back and forth like this. And the cilia in the lungs can wave back and forth in synchrony, like the oars of a Roman galley. And therefore, they can sweep the mucus secreted by the goblet cells up to your throat, where it can be expelled and help to keep your lungs clean. Well, these look simple, but what does it take to make them wave back and forth like that? No, my hair can't wave back and forth like that. It would be fun if it did. It would be very entertaining, but it doesn't work like that. Well, it turns out that modern science has shown that the cilia is extremely complex. This is a cross-section perpendicular to the axis of one cilium, and it has a large number of components. It has these double ring things, and they are called microtubules. And the microtubules are connected to each other by something called a Nexon linker. And attached to each one is something called dynein, which is a motor protein. And the cilium works by the dynein motor protein. If you look at me, the dynein motor protein reaches over from one cilium, or one microtubule, grabs the other and pushes it down. And as it pushes it down, the other one starts to bend because it's linked to it by the Nexon linker. Let's see. And here's a little cartoon showing that. The dynein motor protein pushes down, and as this slides with respect to that, it's held tightly by the linker, and the whole thing starts to bend. And as it bends, then it reverses itself. It reverses itself and goes back and forth and back and forth. And work has shown that the cilium has hundreds of different protein parts. So it is much more complex than the simple structure that it looked like in the 19th century. Another good example, perhaps familiar to many people, is called the Bacterial Flagellum, which is quite literally an outboard motor that cells can use to swim. It's got a part that acts as a propeller, which spins around and around and around, which drives the cell through liquid. But the propeller is attached through something called a universal joint, which allows the rotation of the motor to be transferred to a different plane and rotate the propeller. And the universal joint is attached to a central part called the drive shaft. And the drive shaft is attached to a motor, and the motor is attached to a stator, which holds it in place. And the whole thing pokes up through the membranes and requires bushing materials to let it pass through. Now, I'm sure that you can see that much like a mousetrap, if this didn't have its parts, it would not be able to work. If the propeller were missing, it would be like an outboard motor that didn't have a propeller. It wouldn't be able to push it through liquid. If the drive shaft were missing, it wouldn't be able to transmit the power from the motor. If the motor were missing or many of the other parts, it simply wouldn't work. It's not like it would spin half as fast. It wouldn't work at all. So much like the psyllium and much like the mousetrap, the bacterial flagellum is irreducibly complex. If you wanted to build something like a flagellum starting from scratch, what would you have first? Would you have the propeller, but that couldn't spin? Would you have just the motor, but that's not attached to anything? So again, that's a big problem for Darwin's theory of gradual evolution. And more than that, irreducible complexity has two main points, two sides to the irreducibly complex coin. One thing is that it's extremely difficult to see how something like that could be produced by a Darwinian process. And the second point is that it looks like a machine, a real machine, not some sort of analogy for a machine. It's a real molecular machine. And when we see the parts here all working together, we quickly apprehend that this was designed. This was not an accident. Let me skip ahead a slide. Whoa. Other examples of the same thing, and ask, what is intelligent design? And the intelligent design is defined as the purposeful arrangement of parts. And that means that we can infer design whenever we see parts that have been arranged to accomplish a function. Now, many of my critics, and I guess I should tell you that I do have some critics. Some critics say that this Behe fellow is a known Christian. He has been seen entering and leaving churches. And so therefore, this idea of design is a religious idea. It's not scientific. Well, it turns out that's not correct. And I think we can see how we actually detect design simply by the physical arrangement of parts. Let's look at the next slide. This is a cartoon called The Pharcyde, and in it we have a troop of jungle explorers. And the lead explorer has been strung up and skewered. And this fellow here turns to this guy here and says, "That's why I never walk in front." I can sympathize with that. Now, everybody in this room looks at this cartoon, and you immediately realize that this was designed. That's not an accident. As a matter of fact, the humor of the cartoon depends upon you recognizing the purposeful design. It wouldn't be funny if he had just fallen over a cliff or something. So the point is that design is not a religious conclusion. It's not a philosophical conclusion. It's based on the physical evidence plus knowing that a purposeful arrangement of parts is how we detect design. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just because, oh, this is a good slide too. Oh, too bad. Okay. All right. Well, then look at this. It turns out that this is really simple. I mean, this is not rocket science. Nonetheless, it seems to have caught people by surprise, and the book got reviewed pretty widely in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the Allentown Morning Call, all the major media. That's my hometown. Hey. A board magazine in Bolivia, which is the in-flight magazine of an airline, gave it a 4-page review. Christianity Today in the United States voted it the book of the year back in 1997, I think. And Skeptic Magazine, a magazine for atheists, did not vote it book of the year. And it got a lot of other reviews too. And with all of these things, there was a firestorm of criticism. So in the 20 years since the book appeared, what criticisms have been the most prominent? Well, the most prominent criticism is shown on the next slide here. And that is that intelligent design seems to point strongly beyond nature. It seems to have philosophical, maybe even theological implications. And some people think that science should stay far away from theories that have such strong extra scientific implications. Well, I understand that complaint, but I disagree with it. I think that science should follow the evidence wherever it leads and let other people worry about the extra scientific implications. It turns out that there have also been a number of other criticisms based on science, but surprisingly weak ones. And I'm not just saying that because I wrote the book. But let me give you an example of perhaps the most prominent system that I talked about was the flagellum, the bacterial flagellum. Everybody remembers that because it's such a stunning molecular machine. And the book came out in 1996, and it wasn't until more than 10 years later that a paper appeared in a peer-reviewed journal that wanted to begin research to explain the evolution of the flagellum. Interestingly, in this paper, written by two very strong intelligent design critics, they wrote, in recent years, flagellar biologists have made astonishing progress in understanding the structure, function, and regulation of bacterial flagella. However, the flagellar research community has scarcely begun to consider how these systems have evolved. In other words, 10 years after this prominent challenge to Darwin's theory, which incited many very smart scientists, no one had even started to research how such a thing can have arisen. And let me tell you, that continues to be the case today. Let me go back one slide and say that neither of those two authors has published another paper dealing with the flagellum. Neither has any other author published a paper dealing with how the flagellum might have evolved. So let me skip. So more than 20 years after Darwin's black box, there has not even been an attempt to explain it in Darwinian terms. To Darwinists, it remains a mystery. But science has not stood still in that time, and science does best, what science does best is discovering how the natural world works. And as is almost always true, the more science investigates life, the more complex and more elegant it is seen to be. For example, a year or two ago, a paper was published showing that there was this insect called the plant hopper, and it can jump really far, really fast. And the anatomists discovered that one stage of the insect has gears. Gears, you see these little bumps on these two semicircular things. They are actually tooths of a gear, and they can rotate and help the insect jump. And here's a close-up of that area showing the interdigitation, the coming together of the different teeth of the gear. When that paper appeared, a number of people were astounded. They said, gears in life. And the reason they were astounded is that you can tell that this points strongly to design. You might even say it's undeniable, but I wouldn't say that. I'd say it points strongly to the design. But the interesting thing, I'm going to skip over a slide. The interesting thing is that this ain't nothing like is found at the molecular level. This only got people's attention because they could see it easily. But another research group a couple of years ago discovered another bacterium that had a superpowered bacterial flagellum. And it didn't have just one flagellum. See, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It had 7 flagella all in a bundle. But they weren't wrapped around each other. They all spun in the same direction, in the same way. But you would expect them to interfere with each other. Sorry. But it turns out they have gears, counter-rotating gears between the separate flagella to allow them to all rotate in the same direction. It's interesting in that one paper 10 years ago that said we should start investigating these flagella. One of their arguments was against intelligent design proponents was to say that there isn't a single flagellum. There's variations on flagella. There's a number of different flagella. Well, they didn't know the half of it back then. Here's one. And they went on to write that one is faced with two options in the face of all these different kinds of flagella. Either there were thousands or even millions of individual creation or design events, which strains Occam's razor to the breaking point, or one has to accept that all the highly diverse contemporary flagellar systems have evolved from a common ancestor. Well, there is no reason to think that that superpowered flagellum could be approached step by small Darwinian step from even an ordinary flagellum. So the question is, or it seems like, design extends very far into nature, not just to a broad class of flagella, but to variations on the theme of flagella. And, okay. And further complications have been discovered. Just a year or so ago, I think in 2016, some workers were looking at a bacteriophage called T4. Now, bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacterial cells. And here's a picture of it doing so, and here's a drawing of our best understanding of the structure of the bacteriophage. It looks like a moon lander. You know, the DNA of the phage is packed in this geometric space, and this is a hypodermic needle, which actually injects the DNA down through the cell membrane into the cell that it is infecting. And the people in doing the research concentrated on this portion, just this portion of the bacteriophage, and they called it the T4 base plate, the T4 base plate. And I don't, well, in brief, it's enormously complex, enormously sophisticated. This is the plate before the DNA is injected, and it springs and collapses and uses the energy of contraction to push the DNA down. When the bottom here lands on top of a bacterium, legs are folded up here, and they spring out, they jump out and extend, and that's what helps the phage land on the bacterium. And when they touch it, it sends a signal through the legs up to the base plate to allow it to function. There's many more details that are necessary for that to function, but I think I'm got the point across. And the point is that the complexity of we know of, that can't be explained by Darwin, and it's only getting much more sophisticated. And so, here's some nice pictures of the apparatus, which I'll skip over. But the bottom line is this, that after 20 years and many criticisms, a conclusion of intelligent design is increasingly undeniable. It is rationally justified, and I think that's pretty modest. It's rationally compelling. Now, there have been many more criticisms of intelligent design, many directed at my work too, and I have posted responses to critics which can be found at a number of places. First on my website at Lehigh University, and again at a place called Uncommon Descent, but most especially on the website of the Discovery Institute. There are many essays and many responses to criticisms from over the years. So I hope that I've shown that, in fact, over decades, this idea of irreducible complexity and of intelligent design has weathered intense criticism from many brilliant scientists, and has only gotten worse for Darwin and much more compelling for intelligent design. Oh, thank you very much for your attention.
Eutangelo. Okay, I have not read your second book, but I've heard that you are a proponent of common ancestry, and I would like to understand what are your reasons for this conclusion. And one major issue that I have is that there are mainstream science papers that say that bacteria and eukaryotes are too different. And especially the membrane, the cell membrane, is different, and also the DNA replication. And that it would be very difficult to have a common ancestor that then, rather than that would be evolution, that would have to be a devolution. That means that the common ancestor, it would be more complex than eukaryotes or prokaryotes. So I would like to know your reasons about this issue.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very important point. Darwin's theory, or evolution, has many different meanings. One is common descent, that organisms today are descended from organisms in the past. And universal common descent means that all organisms are descended from one beginning organism. But that idea, or something like that idea, had been proposed well before Darwin. The idea of the unfolding of life, or the great chain of being. So ideas like descent had been discussed. Darwin's major claim to fame is that he thought he had discovered a mechanism which could explain how that could happen without any intelligent direction. The ideas before him had always thought that there was a guidance or purpose built into nature, or somehow some mind was behind life. But Darwin said, no, none of that is necessary. It's simply random changes in life followed by natural selection. And I think myself that is the most important philosophical and theological claim and scientific claim of his theory. The idea of common descent is interesting, that organisms descended from each other, but well, how did that happen? It doesn't really explain much. It just states what happened. The idea of natural selection that's interesting too, but it's really trivial. I mean, who would deny that an organism that luckily was better suited to its environment could expect to live longer and leave more offspring? That seems pretty modest. The big claim of Darwin is that random changes, just random variations, would provide the fodder for natural selection to piece together things even as complex as the eye and make coherent, functional, complex systems. And that has been the aspect of his theory that has been objected to ever since the beginning. Now, I myself think the evidence for common descent is okay. It's good. And for the same reason that most other people do. And that's because most organisms have a lot of things in common at the biological level. DNA, proteins, many similarities. So if common descent were true, then you'd expect that to be correct. And so I concede, for the purposes of argument, that is a reasonable idea. I'm not wedded philosophically to that idea, but it seems reasonable to me. And besides, I'm not interested in common descent. I don't care much about it. I want to know how that could have happened. And it has been my experience that Darwinists will be happy to talk with you all day about the evidence for common descent, but they run into the shadows when you ask them to explain how their ideas can account for something complex. So I concentrate on that. If common descent turns out not to be true, that's fine. You know, I'm not philosophically committed to it, but I have my hands full just objecting to Darwin's mechanism. So that's my...
Mais alguma pergunta? Se você quer, quem gostaria?
Okay, let me call on people.
É. You? Pode fazer em português, em inglês. Olha lá. Vem aqui até o microfone. Você vai fazer em português ou em inglês? Português? Então coloca o... isso. Mike, you have to wear the mics, the headphones.
Ooh, it's not working. I'm sorry. Oh. Oops. Wait.
Dr. Michael.
Yes.
Adelson. Prazer.
Nice to meet you.
O senhor poderia dizer se há pesquisadores, doutores, a teoria darwinista, que têm aprendido, como dos Daig inteligentes têm aprendido com a teoria da evolução?
Okay. I'm not sure of the question. Do you mean, did they change their minds about
Não, não.
evolution?
Eu percebo que o pessoal do design inteligente tem aprendido com a teoria da evolução, em muitos aspectos, em toda a teoria. Se por um acaso esses doutores que defendem a evolução também têm predisposto a aprender com design inteligente.
Oh, okay. Well, there are many people, so you can't say something about everyone, but a large number of scientists who study evolution are irresolute against intelligent design. And I think that's because of historical reasons, because from the beginning, many supporters of evolution used it to oppose religion in England, and they do so in other countries as well. And many irreligious people see it as their only hope, I guess, in a sense. And also, many scientists are proud in that they want science to be able to explain everything. And if intelligent design is true, then they can't account for everything in the world, and then maybe they're not the most important people in the world. Maybe, pastors might have something to say, or philosophers. So unfortunately, in my experience, most scientists, at least who speak publicly, are unwilling to entertain the idea of intelligent design. Some have, but mostly not.
Olha, nós vamos encerrar então a participação do Michael Birri. Eu gostaria que você desse novamente uma salva de palmas para ele. Agradecendo. Thank you, Birri. Agradecendo a participação dele na inauguração do Discovery Mackenzie. Nós vamos passar agora a palavra para o Douglas X, a estrela emergente do design inteligente, que vai falar sobre o seu novo livro e as teses mais recentes do design inteligente. Vai se preparando para as perguntas, e no final a gente vai fazer pelo menos 3 ou 4 perguntas para ele, tá bom?
Thank you. It is very good to be here. I'm looking forward to a large number of American universities copying the model of Mackenzie University and bringing intelligent design into the research sciences where it belongs. A little bit about myself. I have spent the last 25 years or so doing research, testing whether Darwin's theory can explain the origin of new genes and the proteins that genes encode. And I came to the conclusion very unambiguously that Darwin's theory fails to explain new genes and new proteins. And I got an opportunity 2.5 years ago or so to write a book. And I was asking myself, what is the best approach to take with a book? Should I take this technical science and explain it in simple terms so that non-scientists can follow the argument? Or should I think of another way to argue altogether? And I ended up deciding for the latter, that I would find a way to argue design that does not require the reader to have any technical understanding, and argue instead starting from something where we all are on level ground, where we all have something in common. And that's called the design intuition, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. The basic idea, though, is that common sense reasoning can be every bit as powerful as technical reasoning, in some cases even more powerful than technical reasoning. I want to give you just a simple example that has to do with the question of existence. There was a very smart, very intelligent Greek philosopher by the name of Gorgias, who spent a lot of time thinking about existence and theorizing about existence. And he came to this profound conclusion after many years of thinking about existence. Nothing exists. Okay. Now, if he was right, and he was very, very smart, if he was right, then we should be worried that perhaps we don't exist. But I don't see anyone out there who looks worried that they don't exist. What that tells us is common sense tells us, however smart this man was, he got that wrong, okay? And it's not just that he thought many years ago. If a modern physicist were to take up where Gorgias left off and come up with a physical theory of our non-existence, and were to go up to the blackboard and scrawl out this theory, this proof, and at the end throw it down the chalk and say, therefore, you do not exist, you should not believe that physicist. Common sense tells us that that physicist cannot be correct. That has to do with existence. Let's talk about origins, because I think there's something similar with the question of origins, specifically our origin. A professor of psychology at UC Berkeley wrote the following: by elementary school age, children start to invoke an ultimate godlike designer to explain the complexity of the world around them. Even children brought up as atheists. Okay, very revealing. Now, she was not approving of this. She thought all children have this idea. They look at a butterfly, they look at a fern leaf, and they say to themselves, someone made this, someone like God made this. Now, she was arguing that that's a bad thing, and that from a very early age, we need to teach the children that that intuition of design is false, and that Darwin has correctly explained life. She was advocating children's stories where you gather the children around from a very early age and read them stories about the Darwinian account of our origin. This came out in the Wall Street Journal, and the title of her article was See Jane Evolve, Picture Books Explain Darwin. But I'm asking myself, what if the children, well, if she was right, we have an elitist view of our understanding of origins, don't we? If Gopnik was right, the professors are right, and the children are wrong, and really all of us except the professors of biology are in a position of looking up to them in the academy and allowing them to tell us the truth about where we came from and who we are as humans. They are the people who know. We are down here as the people who are ignorant. And the only way we remove our ignorance is by listening to them and learning from them. That's an elitist view. What if the children are right? Then the picture looks more like this. The people in the academy have been telling lies for 150 years. They get stuck in their lies. They have to keep perpetuating these lies. And having learned a false idea of where we came from, they can no longer see obvious truths. Everyone else is seeing the truth just fine. It's the people who have accepted these fancy theories that are false theories have become stuck in a lie that they can't get out of. If this is the case, and I believe it is, then it reminds me of a certain children's story about a naked emperor, which you may have heard of, where the people who care most about how they are perceived, who care the most about status, are the most likely to be deceived and to continue a deception. Whereas the people who really don't care about that, they only care about calling things as they are, about speaking the truth, are the ones who are not deceived, like the child in the story of the emperor's new clothes. Okay, so in my book, I define this thing that I call the universal design intuition. And it's, in essence, a very simple idea. It has to be simple if 4-year-olds have it. I put words to it that are something like this. As makers of things, we instantly recognize things that were made. And we know these things can't be made without know-how. We look at things, we know someone knew what they were doing to make them, and we recognize immediately that only by knowing can someone make them. A simpler way to put it is accidents cannot do the work of know-how. Only know-how, only knowledge can do the work of know-how. Let me take a simple example. You've seen one of these before, right? An origami crane. Picture yourself as a young child, a 4-year-old who's never seen something like this before. You see it on a table. Immediately you recognize that is a piece of paper, but it's a piece of paper that somebody did something clever to. And only by doing something clever can you end up with paper looking like a bird. And typically when a child realizes this, they're thinking, how was this done? How can I do this to a piece of paper? It's similar reasoning, I think, that when a child sees the real crane, they say, this is something remarkable. Someone did something to make this. And only a very ambitious 4-year-old would say, how can I make one of these? But it's the similar reasoning in the two cases. Okay, so this intuition is real, and everyone is acknowledging that the intuition is real, but intuitions can be false. Why should we take this design intuition seriously? How do we know that this one is true? What I want to do is take a moment to show you that this intuition doesn't just come out of thin air. It actually has common sense and everyday observation underlying it. It has something like science, a simple version of science that I call common science underlying it. Okay, so our intuition with respect to that origami crane is origami cranes can't happen by accident. That's not an intuition without data behind it. There's an observation behind this intuition. And that observation is that origami cranes don't happen by accident. What I mean by that is, suppose you spent many years working at a paper recycling facility using heavy equipment to move stacks of paper around, piles of paper, in order to go into the pulper where they get made into new paper. You could be at this job for 50 years and you would never see an origami crane that happens by accident. All kinds of things are happening to the paper as it's being moved around. It's being torn, it's being creased, it's being folded, it's being crumpled. But never will you see an origami crane come out of those accidental causes unless someone who folded an origami crane put it in the recycle bin and it ended up at the recycle facility, right? So we have the intuition that origami cranes can't happen by accident. We have this observation that they don't happen by accident, and that raises a question. If they don't happen by accident, why don't origami cranes happen by accident? Well, if you've ever tried to fold an origami crane, you know why they don't happen by accident. It's hard sometimes for them to happen on purpose. There's so many steps that have to be done, and each one has to be done in order, correctly, and the origami crane only comes out at the very end, after some 20 or so folding steps. Now, you might think that an accidental cause could crease a piece of paper maybe in half, maybe diagonally. So any one of these steps, possibly, maybe 1 in a billion, could happen by accident. But it's the succession of all these things having to happen in order that tells us that there's no way this can happen by accident. So we have a deduction. For an origami crane to happen by accident would be fantastically improbable. Okay? I use the term fantastically improbable in the book to mean literally the stuff of fantasy. Not in reality can anything that improbable happen. Okay, so our deduction is that for an origami crane to happen by accident would be fantastically improbable. We can generalize that and talk about things other than origami cranes. And we have a principle, a general principle: accidents can't do the work of know-how. And that comes back to our intuition and supports it. But look at the sequence of things that we've done. We started with our observation. We asked a question. We made a deduction after we answered our question, and then we generalized our deduction to a principle, a law. What does that look like? These sorts of activities are the things of science. That's a simple version of what scientists do, and it supports this intuition that accidents cannot make clever things, right? So, here's our principle: accidents can't do the work of know-how, or accidental causes can't invent. In the book, Undeniable, I speak of invention, and I use the word in the sense that's illustrated by this figure, that an invention is it's similar to what Mike is talking about. A mousetrap is an invention, and all these things that he was pointing to are inventions. But this diagram shows sort of the logic that you see repeated in all inventions. They all have a top level function, and they have structure underneath that top level function, a bunch of things doing little roles, all of which add up to the top function. So down here at the bottom level, you have elementary constituents, the very smallest things that group together. Each of them is doing something such that when they group together, they perform a function one level up. And those group together to perform a function another level up. And you could have many of these levels and many of these elementary constituents, but you always have this hierarchy. The very simple things combining in just the right way to produce a top level thing that performs a top level function. I call this idea functional coherence in the book, which is the hierarchical arrangement of parts needed for anything to produce a high-level function, each part contributing in a coordinated way to the whole. Okay, that sounds complicated, but if you've ever sent a text message, you've invented something in that sense. Suppose you send someone a text and it says, "Meet me outside the library at 4:30. What you've done there is arranged simple elementary things, the letters, the numbers, the punctuation, to form words at one level higher, and you've arranged the words to form phrases and sentences at the next level up. All of which was done in order to achieve some functional objective, namely to have your friend meet you outside the library at 4:30. So this functional coherence is something familiar. Every time we write, we use it, and all the objects that we recognize as inventions are examples of this. I came across a book by someone named Todd McClellan called Things Come Apart, and it has beautiful pictures that illustrate this functional coherence. Here's a picture of a Swiss Army knife taken apart, and you see here, even if we don't know what all of these parts are, and I can't name all of the parts, you know that they would not be in the knife if they were not performing a small function that's necessary for the top level function of a utility knife, okay? And that's true not just of a knife, it's true of everything that we consider to be a high-level functional invention. A bicycle. I don't recommend that you do this with your bicycle, but you can take it apart into every single part. And again, I can name many of these parts, but not all of them, but we know that not a single part would be up there unless it were contributing to the top-level function of a bicycle being a mechanism of transportation, right? It's true of a chainsaw. And it's not simply the case. When we look at this, we recognize that this must be a design thing. We recognize the hierarchy because these parts seem to go together to do something. That's not always going to happen every time we see a bunch of parts, even parts of complex shape, right? Here's a collection of complex shapes, and we don't have the design intuition. When we look at this, we don't say, oh, someone must have invented that. It also doesn't require, in order for us to intuit design, it's not necessary that you have a pretty arrangement or a sensible arrangement of these parts. The author of this book, Todd McClellan, also threw parts in the air and took photographs of them. Here you don't have a nice arrangement of the parts, but still anyone can look at that and recognize that those are the parts that go together to perform a high-level function. It's also not necessary, in order for us to intuit design, that we know what the top-level function is. And when I give this talk to audiences with young people, say in their 20s or younger, I say, you probably don't know what this is, and many of them actually don't know what this is. That is an old version of a telephone, very unlike the modern version of a telephone. So if this is true, that we see design when we see this hierarchy, low levels supporting higher levels, supporting the top level function, if it's true of things that humans have made, it is far more true of the things that God has made, of living things, of ourselves. Here is a simple diagram of the major components of a human body. It's not even complete. A major component is the skin. The skin is not up there, but you have organs and the muscles and the bones, major parts of a human body, and you see this amazing complexity of the parts that are all there in order to support the top-level function of us living life as human beings. Now, what makes this more spectacular than, say, the bicycle or the Swiss Army knife is we can keep looking more and more closely at each one of these parts, and we see more and more and more layers of complexity revealed. You see above the right arm there, two little eyeballs staring at you. If we look at one of those, you have parts within the eye, the retina, the cornea, the sclera, the lens, the vasculature, the blood supply coming to and from the eye. All of these things have to be there in order for the eye to function, in order for us to see, in order for our lives as humans. And we can look further at any one of these parts, and we see more layers of complexity. If we look at the retina, here's a picture of the rod and cone cells that make up the retina, the retinal tissue. You have these orange things are rod cells, and the yellow things are cone cells. The cells that receive photons, light, and produce an electrical signal that goes to the brain, is processed by the brain in order for us to see. Fantastic complexity at the level of a single tissue, the retina. And we can go further and look at the complexity within a single cell. This is not a rod cell or a cone cell. It's an artist's rendition of a generic animal cell. And even if we don't know or name the parts within it, you can see that there's extraordinary complexity on the inside of a cell in order for a cell to function. And interestingly, there's no such thing as a generic animal cell. All the cells in our body are specific, function specific. None of them look exactly like this, but they all have that kind of complexity within them. And we can look further, drill down even further to more to smaller things that still show layers of complexity within them. This is an enzyme, possibly the most sophisticated enzyme in existence. It is a complex of proteins and RNA molecules called the ribosome. This is the giant molecular complex that is responsible for reading the transcripts off of genes to synthesize protein sequences based on the genetic instructions in a gene. Fantastically complex. Again, we can look further into this and see that it's parts within parts, all of which are there for the purpose of performing a high-level function, and the ultimate function here is for us to be alive, right? Okay, so the argument all boils down to this. Accidental invention is impossible because it would require an unbelievable coincidence. When we look at something like this, we automatically see this as being a product of genius, right? We think of this as something that can only be made by genius, someone who can understand things far better than we can make things like this. What Darwin has told us and what many scientists today believe is that, in fact, this was made by accidental causes. Okay, if that's true, then we have a very remarkable coincidence because these two causes are so dissimilar. They are polar opposites. If the lower cause, accident, really did do what genius can do, it's not because there's similarity between those two causes. No two causes could be further apart. It can only be an astonishing coincidence, an unbelievable coincidence. And if you look at the problem in this way, the argument in this way, you realize there's no way out of this because you can come up with all the complex theories you want, natural selection, all kinds of things that go beyond natural selection in modern evolutionary theory that complicate the matter, but none of them remove the fact that you're ultimately talking about an unbelievable coincidence if you're saying that life happened by accident. It doesn't matter how complicated the theory is, it cannot remove this basic problem. Science is supposed to explain by eliminating fantastic coincidences, not hiding them. And all that happens with all the complexity of modern evolutionary theory is hiding the coincidence, not eliminating it. You can play the shell game, but the coincidence is always there. You can trace it back and find out where the coincidence has been hidden. The only way to eliminate the coincidence is by eliminating that explanation and affirming the design explanation. I will end there, and I'd be happy to take questions if I can, if there's...
Perguntas? Em português, inglês, tanto faz? Quem gostaria? Alguma? Dou-lhe uma. Ali, ó. Sim, por favor. Você gostaria de... Português? Você vai falar em português. Coloca... Wear the headphones, please. Pode vir aqui no microfone, por favor? Tem uma outra pergunta lá, se já puder chegar aqui mais para frente.
Quero parabenizar o doutor pela brilhante apresentação. E, pelo que eu tenho, sim, estudado, observado, essa questão sobre teoria da evolução e também o design inteligente, eu tenho percebido o seguinte, que as evidências, posso dizer que quase que todas as evidências têm apontado para o design. Eu gostaria de saber do doutor qual evidência, né, que a teoria da evolução ela pode apresentar para os proponentes do design inteligente, que vocês consideram como algo assim muito forte dentro da teoria da evolução. Se você poderia passar para a gente um argumento da teoria da evolução, seja ela darwinista ou não, que pode trazer, colocar em discussão de uma maneira assim, mais séria. Eu não sei se o doutor entendeu minha pergunta.
Thank you. I think I have understood it correctly. Let me tell you a little story about a specific research project. Oh, wait, can you hear? A specific research project that we undertook and published. And I'll tell you what the response has been. And I think it's the sort of response we're getting on multiple levels now. My colleague Ann Gager and I took a specific, we took a pair of proteins that are enzymes. They do chemistry. We'll call them A and B. And they look very similar. You can overlap the structures. They look very similar, but they do different chemistries. One does job A and the other does job B. And what we did is we removed B from the cells, and we tried to find a way that A could get converted into B, so that the A protein could do the job of the B protein. And we looked at mutations that might do that. And we looked first trying to choose smart mutations that make the active site of A more like B. And we changed A, and it did not do the job of B. And then we did random mutations to A to try to get it to do the job of B. And we did all possible single mutations and the vast majority of possible double mutations, and we still could not get A to perform the function of B. And we reasoned that although it's clearly possible to get A to function like B, the number of changes you would have to make is so large that even in billions of years, an accidental process, evolutionary process, cannot take you from A to B. We wrote this up in a paper, peer-reviewed, published paper, and we anticipated in the paper what the main response would be. And here's what we anticipated. A critic of our work would say that, in fact, in history, A did not evolve into B. Instead, there was some earlier thing, C, that evolved both into A and B. So the transition that we were looking at is not a historical transition. But we knew that, and we said in the paper, we're not trying to replay history. We're trying to see whether natural selection and mutation can actually make a change of function. We're asking a very general question. And it turns out that even in a very ideal case, it doesn't work. Now, interestingly, nobody, to my knowledge, none of our critics have challenged our claim. None of them has said, yes, A can evolve the function of B. And the reason they don't do that is we went into the lab and did the work. And if they were to say it's not true, we would say, show us your evidence. And they don't have the evidence. So the main response has been not only at the molecular level, but at the organismal level, that the things that evolution no longer happens. You can go into the lab and find that enzymes don't evolve, but that's because they all came from some earlier form that did evolve. And the modern forms no longer evolve. They've been perfected to the point where they no longer evolve. The same thing is being said about organisms. They no longer evolve because they have been perfected to the point where they're no longer pliable, okay? But if you examine that response as a scientist, it really seems to be saying Evolutionary theory has now retreated to the point where it's not even talking about life as we see it. It's talking about some hypothetical prior version of life. That has been the response. I have not received any more substantive response than that to our work.
Português. Boa noite, Douglas. Meu nome é Vitor e eu sou pastor e pesquisador. Fico muito feliz de existir pessoas como você e o Dr. Michael que conseguem fazer pesquisa de ponta tendo essas implicações na área do design. E falando da minha experiência mesmo, é uma coisa que eu tenho dificuldade. Eu sou formado em física, pesquiso propriedades estruturais e eletrônicas de clusters metálicos. E, às vezes, a gente foca em coisas tão específicas ali numa área acadêmica que a gente esquece, às vezes, das coisas globais. Então, baseado na minha dificuldade mesmo, eu quero te fazer duas perguntas. A primeira é quais são os grupos hoje que fazem pesquisa de ponta com as implicações no design, como você e seu instituto? Porque, pelo menos eu, aqui no Brasil, não conheço ninguém, alguém de Campinas, e no mundo ouço falar de pessoas assim, ligadas mais na área do teísmo evolucionista, e pessoas do design mesmo, assim, eu pelo menos não conheço muito. Então, o senhor que está aí, eu queria saber quais são as pessoas, e queria também que o senhor desse uma dica para os pesquisadores também, como eu, que às vezes tem essa força de vontade, tem esse desejo, mas não sabe como fazer esse link mais específico. Então, essas duas perguntas. Obrigado.
Very good questions. Thank you. There are, in writing my book, I spent about a third of the book talking about how political science really is. I tell my personal story of ultimately losing my job over doing research on intelligent design at Cambridge, at the Medical Research Council Center in Cambridge. And the reason I tell that story is I want people to know that science is not a dispassionate search for the truth. Science is people acting like people. They become attached to their ideas. They become attached to their career work. They don't always like to be, in fact, they never like to be shown wrong. That's just the way people are, and science operates that way. And I wanted people who read the book to abandon the idea that somehow the scientific method allows science to operate at a level that's superhuman. It doesn't. It's very human. And I think in writing the book, I'm trying to get people to see why it might be that you don't see many people doing work from an intelligent design perspective. The reason you might naively think that it's so stupid that nobody wants to do work from a design perspective. An alternative explanation, which I think is correct, is the naturalistic, materialistic view has become so dominant that when people press up against it, they get removed. They can't publish their work, they can't get grant money, and in my case, they lose their job, okay? So I think that's why it is hard to find them. They are out there. If you go to our website, biologicinstitute.org, you'll see some 20 or so scientists all over the world who are affiliating with us. If you go to bio-complexity.org, you'll see a peer-reviewed science journal that has some 34 top-notch scientists on the editorial board, including Marcos Eberlin. There are scientists all over the world. Now, not all of these scientists are doing design-based projects, but a good number of them are. And in addition, we are gathering with scientists from countries all over the world and having sort of secret meetings where we talk about what sort of science could we do that would advance this. And you'd be welcome to be a part of that. We've got people covering a large number of fields, computing, physics, biology, organismal biology, molecular biology, cell biology. And I end my book with a chapter that's called The New School. And I'm arguing that if we could break free from the old way of thinking, there would be remarkable science ahead. But it's hard work when you're being opposed. And it's hard work when you can't get your colleagues together because everyone will get in trouble if they're doing this work. So I would love for you to be a part of one of these conversations.
Olha, infelizmente nós não vai poder, a gente não tem mais tempo para perguntas, me desculpe. E a gente vai encerrar essa sessão agora de perguntas. Vamos passar a palavra para o nosso chanceler, Mackenzie, Dr. Davi, Charles Gomes. Mas antes, gostaria que a gente desse mais uma salva de palmas aqui para o Douglas X, por essa excelente palestra, as respostas que ele deu. Davi, por favor, encerre aqui a nossa noite. Se você não se inscreveu para o curso amanhã, a gente tem várias palestras, o pessoal do DI dos Estados Unidos, do Brasil. A gente tem algumas vagas ainda, fale com a gente ali na saída, a gente vai abrir essas vagas para você.
Só para agradecer vocês pela presença, despedi-los, rogar que Deus os abençoe. E dizer uma coisa, a última pergunta é uma ótima forma de conectar com aquilo que tem movido o nosso coração no Mackenzie e que fez com que nós chegássemos até esse momento, e aquilo que nos une com o Discovery Institute. Nós temos paixão por olhar para o mundo e entender que esse mundo, mais do que só matéria que existe, ele revela um design, e o design não é só na engenharia básica da matéria. Ele tem propósito, isso nos move. Mas também um sonho, e um sonho que precisa de vocês, de cada um de vocês aqui. Aí a relação com a sua pergunta. Porque a primeira fase é argumentar que a explicação vigente não cobre. A segunda fase é, em cima disso, produzir ciência positiva. E mostrar que você abre horizontes mais promissores se usar de outros pressupostos. A primeira fase é muito legal porque a gente faz, né, ela é uma descoberta de libertação das pessoas. Mas é a segunda fase que vai provar na roda da academia e tudo, que nós não estamos só discutindo conceitos abstratos, mas coisas que a gente quer, de fato, comprovar. E, para isso, o Mackenzie sonha com isso. Eu falava agora há pouco para o Steve que uma das coisas que nos levou a pesquisar em certas áreas no Mackenzie é a crença de que essas áreas eram promissoras dentro de premissas compatíveis com a nossa identidade institucional. Por isso, nanotecnologia, grafeno, aquelas coisas que você, ao estudar, pressupõe que você está tentando aprender com a natureza como é que se faz máquinas microscópicas que vão resolver problemas. E o desafio é esse, para a gente continuar pensando em formas não só de argumentar o caso, mas de ir, em cima disso, construir algo positivo. Quem sabe isso mude, não é mudar apenas a possibilidade de cristãos fazendo ciência sem dor de consciência. Mais que isso, talvez isso cause uma revolução na nossa capacidade de mexer com esse mundo, administrar esse mundo e fazer coisas novas. Que Deus os abençoe. Boa noite.